Live the truth. We're teaching through the New Testament book of James, and today we are in James chapter 3. We're going to be in the second passage of James chapter 3, so we're going to be looking at James 3, verses 13 through 18. It begins with this, verse 13, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" That's a good question. That's an interesting question. Who among us is wise and understanding? Don't raise your hand. Before we decide who is wise, can we at least all agree that this person is not? It's like we invented ladders several years ago. They're valuable, they're helpful. Or maybe we can also rule out the person who posted this on their social media account. I lost my 710. Where can I get one? If you don't understand that, you're not very mechanically inclined, nor am I. But we look at these things and say, okay, someone once put it this way. God put a limit on human wisdom, but he didn't put a limit on human stupidity. Maybe. Verse 13, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" Who do you think is the wisest person in this room? Or how about this? Before we can even get to that, we'd have to ask this question. How would we even go about determining that? Is it IQ test? Bible quiz? Oldest birth date? James answers this question, but he answers it and gives a very different measure. Listen for it. James 3, verse 13 continues with this. It says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." Who is wise and understanding among you? James says, here's how you can measure that. Let them show it by their good life. James, he's teaching wisdom. It's not something that you know. Wisdom is something that you do. It's a way that you live. Wisdom is not the same thing as knowledge. Knowledge is knowing the truth. Wisdom is knowing what to do with that truth. Knowledge is theoretical. Well, wisdom is applicable. Knowledge shows us what to believe. Wisdom shows us how to behave. If you want wisdom, you don't have to be brilliant. There are some smart people who still make some really bad decisions. If we want wisdom, we do need to have a humble, teachable spirit, because the source of wisdom, it's not us. Proverbs puts it this way. Proverbs 9, verse 10, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." If you've heard that, do you know what it means? I think it means this. I think it means that wisdom begins when we recognize there is someone who created this world. We look around and say, all of this isn't just random. There is a designer. There is someone who created this world. We call that creator God. I didn't make it. You didn't make it. He did. The beginning of wisdom is accepting that there is a designer of this world. And the way he designed this world to function trumps my opinions and my thoughts and my desires. It's bigger than little old me. Well, Proverbs 8 explains it this way, and in this verse, wisdom is personified, which means wisdom is actually the one who's talking. So Proverbs 8, verse 23, this is wisdom talking. "I was formed long ages ago, at the very beginning when the world came to be." Wisdom gets at the very nature of the way that God set things up. He established rules, physical rules, natural rules, spiritual rules which govern his creation. It's not just random chaos. He gives consistency. He gives predictability. He gives truths. Wisdom is rooted in accepting and living in a way that aligns with these truths. Okay? Example, this is a rattlesnake. I believe that rattlesnakes are poisonous. And so it's one thing to believe that, and then it would be saying, well, if it's true that rattlesnakes are poisonous, then it would be wise to act on that and not pick one up. Right? If you say, well, I don't believe that they're poisonous, it doesn't really matter if you believe it or if you don't believe it. The truth is going to find you out. Here's a popular belief in the world that we live in today, and you hear it all around us. It's this: there are no rules, there are no laws, there are no truths that relate to all people at all times. Rather, our belief is we just all have our own personal truths that are based on my own desires. So who are you to tell me what's right and to tell me what's wrong? Whatever I feel is right, that's right for me. There's not a right way to do things, and there's not a wrong way to do things. I just need to discover who I am and discover what the truth is for me. And I know, that's common. And I get that. I hear that also. And we hear it and say, well, that's really open-minded and popular, but how do you explain things? How do you explain things like this? Why won't my power strip turn on? Well, I'll tell you why. Because there is a right way and there is a wrong way. Right? These things, there are rules. There are laws that govern things like electricity. If we do it wrong, it's not going to work. There are facts and there are truths that operate independently from my personal thoughts and feelings, which means there is a way that is wrong. There is a way where things are not going to work well if they violate the way that God set things up. Well, James, he proceeds by telling us that there are two types of wisdom. He says there's true wisdom and there's false wisdom. He explains false wisdom first, verse 14 and 15. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Notice a couple things here. First, false wisdom is earthly. Well, what does that mean? In this passage, earthly refers to temporary. James is teaching that false wisdom is short-term thinking. What do I want now? What's going to make me feel good now? What's going to bring pleasure to me now? Earthly or false wisdom happens when we base our decision on instant gratification while ignoring the long-term consequences. I'll give you an example. When I was young, my parents brought myself and my two sisters brought us to a parade. They thought it would be fun. I thought it was boring. Until they started throwing out candy. A lot of candy. So my parents are watching the parade. I'm eating candy. All the candy. I was a happy little guy. But what do you think happened a little later? Well, here's what happened a little later. I barfed. That's what happened later. That candy, it tasted really good. I was having a good time. I was enjoying it, but my body wasn't designed to handle all of that. And so later, I would pay a price. And come to think of it, not just me, my entire family, because I barfed in the car. Yeah, long car ride back home that day. Here's what James is saying. He's saying this false wisdom, this earthly wisdom, it's this. It's when we seek instant gratification while ignoring the longer-term consequences. And we can do this with a lot of different things, a lot of different areas in life. Money. We can do it with money. Buy too much too soon, we get locked into debt. We can do this physically with relationships. Too much, too soon, not a solid foundation, and eventually we're going to get hurt. We can do this with our habits. Too much Netflix and not enough exercise, we're going to get lethargic and depressed. James, he's saying, don't just consider what I want now. Think about, how is this going to affect me later? Don't eat all the candy. Well, false wisdom. He says it's earthly, and he also says this, verse 15 continues, such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Demonic. I hear that word, that kind of catches my attention. You're like, oh wow, James, that's a strong word. He's saying it's demonic. There is an adversary. We can't see him with our eyes. But James says he's there. We have an adversary. We have an enemy. What he's trying to do, he is trying to prevent us from trusting and following Jesus. There's someone who's actively trying to prevent us from trusting and following Jesus. And he's deceptive. He usually hides his tactics. He doesn't usually reveal himself. He wants to kind of trick us into this. And one of the ways he does that is by making things that God didn't design for us seem really appealing to us. Well, that's the demonic. He also says that it's unspiritual. Well, we live in the age of Google, so we're not lacking information and we're not lacking data. Wisdom isn't knowing facts. Wisdom is knowing God and integrating his ways, right, into my daily decisions, because he's the one who wired this whole thing up. He knows how it works best. So is there any false wisdom? Is there any earthly wisdom in my life that's influencing me today? How would we know? Well, that's the next thing he tells us. Verse 16. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. He's saying the way to detect earthly wisdom, it's not by what's in your head. It's not even by what you believe. It's by what's in your life. James is encouraging us to pause once in a while and to reflect, to ask, what's going on inside of me? James, he's teaching that if we want to recognize if there's false wisdom or earthly wisdom in us, he goes, well, then you really need to ask yourself a couple of questions. Here's one, is there any envy in me? He singles out, he says, envy, look for that. It's a sign. Do I want something that someone else has? Am I more aware of what I don't have? Or am I able to be grateful for what I do have? He says the second thing to look for to see if you're under the influence of this false wisdom is selfish ambition. Do I have that in my life? Do I seem to be constantly competing to one-up those around me? Is my unwritten life purpose to make a name for myself? Well, envy and selfish ambition, James says, that's how you can tell if you're living a life based on false wisdom. Well, how can I determine if I'm, living out true wisdom? That's the next verse. Verse 17 and 18, he says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Once again, the measure is not in our heads, but it's in our life. And that list that James puts out there, that's quite a list. Does it describe your natural inclinations? Let me read it again. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Not mine. Those aren't the things that come naturally for me. If those things are in my life, do you know where it comes from? from here. The wisdom that comes from heaven, comes from heaven, comes from heaven. That's important. James, he's saying true wisdom, it's not something that I discover within me. True wisdom isn't something that I can find by just looking within. He's saying true wisdom is something that is received from above. If you want true wisdom, you don't have to have, a super high IQ. If you want true wisdom, see, you do need to have a humble, teachable spirit. Because the source of true wisdom, it's not me, it's not you, it's Him. Am I open? Am I humble? Am I teachable? Am I listening? Wisdom from God. Say, okay, yes, I would like some of that. How do I get that? Well, I think that most all of you already know the answer to that. Because God has been saying the same thing about that, how we can get wisdom. He's been saying the same thing for generations. I'll paraphrase. I think God is saying this: I wrote a book. I wrote a book. Open the book. Read the book. Study the book. Learn the book. Memorize the book. Get in groups with other people and talk about the book. Have you ever thought anything along these lines? You're like, well, I believe that Jesus sacrificed His life on the cross for the forgiveness of sins. And I sin, so I've accepted what Jesus did on the cross. I've accepted that for me. So I got the Jesus thing, right? I'm in. When I die, heaven, here I come. But I'm not there yet. So until then, I'm just going to proceed and keep living my life. See, it's common to see the Bible as something that is relevant to show us how we can get to heaven. And it's common to think of the Bible as something that's relevant for life after death. It is so much more than that. Hear what the psalmist said. This is probably David. Psalm 119, verse 97. Oh, how I love your law. I meditate on it all day long. Your commands are always with me and make me wiser than my enemies. I have more insight than all my teachers, for I meditate on your statutes. He's saying, wisdom, it's in here. He's saying, wisdom, it is available. He's saying, wisdom, it is ours for the taking. This isn't limited to life after death, but it also shows us how we can experience a high quality of life before death. The Bible, it is the greatest source of wisdom in this world. It's not just for my future. It's for my present. It's not just theoretical. It is intensely practical. In this book, there's wisdom for things like friendships, how to find them, how to build them, how to maintain them, how to develop them. In the Bible, there's wisdom for marriages, how we can have a healthy relationship. In the Bible, there's wisdom for dating. In the Bible, there's wisdom for our jobs, the decisions we face. In the Bible, there's wisdom for time management, for priorities, wisdom for all aspects of our life here, now, today. Maybe you're thinking, well, I got up, I came to a worship service, and I hear this. If I want wisdom from God, what I need to do is read the Bible. Mind-blowing. Who would have thunk that? Well, understand this. The issue that James is addressing, it's not a knowing issue. It's an executing issue. James recognized they knew that, But he's like, you're not executing that. So I'm going to close with 3 clear, simple, practical how-tos for anyone who wants to receive what James is talking about here in this passage, wisdom from above. If you want wisdom from above, 3 really clear ways to be able to do this. Number 1, read the Bible. I know you've already heard that. I know that. And I know that that's really basic. I also know this. The wisdom fairy's not just going to show up in your room and grant all your wisdom wishes. That's not the way it works. Open the book. Read the book. Maybe a place to start for you would be to get a Bible. And to get one that you understand. They come in different translations and different paraphrases. I'd encourage you to look for one that's like, oh, I understand what that's saying. That's a language that connects with me. Find one like that. Or maybe if you're not really a reader, that's okay. You can listen to it. There are all kinds of audio versions. Get some kind of Bible apps. There are so many tools and resources that are available to us. I like to get a Bible that's got study notes in it. Those are really helpful. They give context, and they may give some ideas about some of the harder things to understand in the Bible. There's a lot of options that are out there for us. And the other thing that I really need personally to be able to do that and to be able to read the Bible, I find I need to have a consistent, regular time every day. Because when I don't have that consistent, regular time, I find it just doesn't happen. So do you have that? I'd encourage you, put it in your phone. Put it on your calendar and do that until it becomes a life habit. Here's the second thing. First thing, read the Bible. And the second is this, talk about it with others. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I don't understand the Bible. I read it, but I don't get it. Maybe you're not supposed to. Alone. I think one of the ways that God designed the Bible is for it to be something that we do communally. I think that's part of his plan. I think part of the way God got the Bible and brings it to us is so that it's something that will bring us together. So that we can say, hey, we all read this passage this week. What did you think? What did you hear God saying in that? Man, I didn't get this. What do you guys do with that? And we come together and we talk about it and we learn about God and we grow together. 2 awesome things that can happen at the same time. We have a lot of groups here. We have men's groups, we have women's groups, we have community groups, we have young adults groups, we have singles groups, we have couples groups. There are a whole bunch of them. And they meet we probably have a group that meets every day of the week. There are some in the morning, some during the day, some during the evening. When this church started 20-some years ago, there were 2 groups. Well, pick one. Here's when they meet. Now we have a whole bunch of them. Hey, have you tried one? I would encourage you to. Try one for a season and see if that doesn't help. See if that doesn't connect you with some of this wisdom that God's talking about and maybe bring you closer to God as well. So at the end of the service, Will's going to give us some really specific ways to say, well, if I'm interested in that, here's how you can do that. So the third thing, 1, read the Bible. 2, talk about the Bible with others. And the third one is this, the Holy Spirit. If you are a follower of Jesus, God has given you the gift of the Holy Spirit. That's God in us, guiding us, directing us, speaking to us. The Holy Spirit, one of the roles of the Holy Spirit is to help us understand the Bible and to receive wisdom from above. See, there were a bunch of people who were complaining to the Apostle Paul. They said, Paul, we hear you, but we don't understand everything. We don't get everything. We've got the scriptures, but there are things in here that are confusing and hard for us to understand. We're not the only ones who think that and who have said that. They were doing that back in the days of the New Testament. Paul responded to him. Here was Paul's answer to them when he said, hey, what do? We don't understand some of the stuff in this book. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 10. Paul says, these are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except their own spirit within them? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. What we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may understand. So that we may understand, so that we may understand what God has freely given us. Well, one of the roles of the Holy Spirit is to help us understand this wisdom from God in the Bible. Learn to pause. Learn to listen. Learn to recognize his voice. For me, it's not an audible voice. It's more of an internal impression. The more you get the Bible in you and listen, the more distinct the Holy Spirit's voice will become. Interacting with the Holy Spirit is one of God's greatest and most personal and practical gifts. Do you want wisdom from God? 1, read the Bible. 2, get in a group and talk about it with other people. 3, learn to listen to the Holy Spirit. Well, that's James 3. James 3, 13 through 18. Wisdom from God. There is a truth that exists outside of me. It's bigger than me. It's greater than me. It's higher than my thoughts. It's higher than my opinions. It's higher than my feelings. God designed this world to work in a specific and a consistent way. When I don't align my life with that, eventually, hurt, disappointment. When I do align my life with that, then we'll be able to declare these words along with the psalmist. Let's close with this. It's Psalm 16, verse 11. And I invite you to read this with me. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Pray with me.